Wyoming Territory, late September, 1877. The sky burned orange behind the hills when Wade Zeller rode into the quiet town of Clearwater Ridge, dust clinging to his coat and saddle like old grief. The autumn wind had a bite to it, sharp and dry, stirring the sagebrush at the edge of town. That was when he saw her standing alone beneath a crooked willow tree near the abandoned blacksmith shop, her figure still against the fading light. She wore a dark blue dress, simple and worn at the hem, and her arms were folded tight around herself like she was keeping something from falling apart. Her hair, a loose tumble of honey brown, caught the wind. She did not look up at his approach. Wade pulled his horse to a stop. He was not a man who spoke when silence did better, but something in the way she stood like someone waiting without hope moved something in him that had been quiet a long time. "You should not be alone tonight," he said, voice low, steady. The woman looked up then, eyes wide and green, rimmed red like she had cried earlier, and stopped only because there was no time left for it. She blinked, looked away, then looked back again. "I am not expecting trouble," she said, voice thin as thread. "Neither was my sister," Wade said. "But trouble does not wait for an invitation." She studied him a moment, as if weighing whether she ought to be afraid. "Who are you?" "Wade Zeller. Came down from the Sweetwater River country. I was passing through. I saw you, and he paused, not sure what truth the stranger would accept. "You just looked like you needed someone." She hesitated, then nodded once. "Willa Ellery," she said quietly. "I live just past the livery. Or I did. Not anymore." "What happened?" "My husband's gone. Left in July for Colorado. Said he'd send for me and my daughter. Never did. I waited weeks. Then a letter came from a mining town near Denver. Said he was not coming back. That he had found someone else." Something cracked in her voice when she said it, but she held herself upright, jaw tight. Wade dismounted, leading his horse slowly closer. "You said daughter? She is 6. Her name is Addie. She is asleep at the boarding house. I was out here thinking how I am going to tell her we are leaving. I cannot pay for another week. I do not know where we are going. I just know we cannot stay." Wade looked at her, really looked. She was not just heartbroken. She was cornered, alone in a town that had turned cold the moment her husband disappeared. He had seen it before, how quick folks were to forget a woman once she had no man beside her. "I have a camp just outside town," he said. "Clean, quiet. There is a little stove. Coffee if you want it. You and Addie can stay there tonight. No strings. It is just better than being out here alone." She hesitated again, breath catching. "You do not even know me. You are standing alone at the edge of town with nowhere to go. That is enough for me." Willa looked down at her hands, clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. Then she nodded. "Let me wake her." They walked back together in silence, the falling dark wrapping around them like a thick blanket. The boarding house was dim and quiet. Upstairs, Willa gently woke her daughter Addie, a small, sleepy girl with dark curls and a tiny frown. Wade watched as Willa knelt beside the child's bed, brushing hair from her face, whispering soft things that made Addie nod and yawn and cling to her mother's neck. They rode out together shortly after, Addie curled against her mother's chest, wrapped in Wade's spare coat. The trail to his camp was short and lit by starlight. The camp sat tucked into a grove of cottonwoods, a small fire already burning low. There was a canvas tent, a few supplies, and a battered tin kettle warming near the fire. Willa stepped inside the tent with Addie while Wade stirred the fire. When she returned, she was barefoot, her sleeves rolled up. She sat across from him in the dirt, the fire's glow flickering between them. "Why are you out here alone?" she asked after a long pause. Wade did not answer right away. He reached for the kettle, poured 2 tin cups of coffee, and handed one to her. "Lost someone," he said finally. "A long time ago. My sister. She was 17. Got caught in a flood crossing the Platte. I was supposed to be with her. I was not. After that, I just kept riding." Willa looked at the fire. "You never settled?" "No one wanted me to settle. I was mostly in the way." Addie stirred inside the tent, calling softly for her mother. Willa stood, ducked inside, then came back out a few minutes later. "She is asleep again," she said, sitting back down. "She asked if you were a good man." "What did you tell her?" "I said you are a man who gave us warmth when we had none. That is good enough for now." They fell quiet again. The fire popped and cracked, stars wheeling slow overhead. Wade glanced at her across the flames. She did not look broken anymore, just tired, but her eyes were steady. "You can stay as long as you need," he said. She looked up at him. "Why are you being kind to me?" He shrugged. "Because someone should be." Her eyes softened. She looked down at her cup, then back at him. "Thank you, Wade." He nodded. "You are welcome, Willa." The wind shifted. The night grew colder, but neither of them moved. She pulled her shawl tighter, and he added another log to the fire. When she looked at him again, something gentler had settled between them, like a promise not yet spoken, but felt all the same. At first light, Wade stepped quietly away from the tent, boots sinking into the damp earth near the creek. Mist hovered above the water, soft and thin as breath. He crouched by the bank and washed his face, the cold biting into him. The quiet out here was different than the stillness of towns. It held space for sorrow, but it didn't press on it. He stayed there a while, listening to the low rustle of cottonwood leaves and the shuffle of a mule deer moving through brush nearby. When he returned, Willa was sitting on an overturned crate near the fire ring, feeding Addie a piece of dry biscuit from her satchel. The girl was wrapped in the same coat, her hair sticking up in places. She chewed slowly, eyes on Wade. "She thought you were gone," Willa said, voice hoarse from sleep. "I told her you wouldn't leave without saying something." "I wouldn't," Wade said, setting down a tin pail. "There's a spring close by. I'll boil some water, make breakfast proper." Addie slid off the crate and followed him as he worked. She didn't speak, just watched with the solemnity of a child who'd learned too much too soon. Willa pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I'd forgotten what it's like to hear someone else moving nearby. It's strange how silence can turn on you." Wade added dry pine to the fire, coaxing it to life. "It's worse when there's no one to hear it with you." She didn't answer right away. Addie tugged at her sleeve, and Willa gathered her into her lap, resting her chin on the girl's head. "I came from Fayetteville originally," she said after a time. "My father was a cooper, put all his hopes in wooden barrels and sons he never had. I married Joel because he smiled easy and didn't talk down to me. We came west thinking it would stretch a life wider. It didn't." Wade stirred the cornmeal mush with a stick, then handed her a tin of dried apples. "You ever think about going back?" "There's no one left to go back to. My mother passed when I was 16. My father not long after. I haven't written east in years." Wade nodded. "Then maybe west is still the way." Willa looked at him, squinting through the smoke. "You think there's still something good to be found out here?" "I think good finds its way to people who keep walking." She held his gaze, and he saw something shift there, a careful loosening, like a door unlatched just enough to let in air. Later that morning, Wade hitched his gelding and rode into town for supplies. Willa stayed behind with Addie, helping her gather twigs for kindling and rinse the apples in the stream. When he returned, he found them crouched over a little line of rocks, arranging them into a crooked circle. "She's building a corral," Willa said. "Says she's saving space for a pony." Wade handed over a small sack of flour and a tin of lard. "One day, maybe she'll have one." They spent the rest of the day working quietly. Wade split wood while Willa patched a tear in the canvas flap. Addie wandered between them, carrying twine and humming to herself. When the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, Wade lit the lantern and set it near the fire. "You ever cook with wild onion?" he asked, opening a pouch of dried herbs. "I've cooked with less," she said, taking it from him. "Give me a pot." By the time the stew was ready, the wind had picked up, carrying the smell of rain from the west. They ate close to the fire, bowls warm in their hands. Addie drifted off not long after, curled against a saddle blanket under the tent flap. Wade leaned back on his elbows, watching the flicker of flame catch in Willa's eyes. "You planning to move on soon?" he asked. "I was, but I don't know where I'd go." "You could stay." She looked at him sharply. "Here?" He nodded. "I've got room enough. I'm heading toward the Wind River Valley before the cold sets in. There's work chopping timber, hauling freight. I could use someone who knows how to mend canvas and cook better than I do." She shook her head slowly, not in refusal, but in disbelief. "You don't even know me." "I know enough. And I'm not offering out of pity. I didn't think you were." The lantern cast a soft glow over her face, her hair falling loose around her neck. She looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I'd want to earn my keep." "You already have." She smiled, then not wide, just enough to bend the exhaustion in her face into something gentler. "I'll think on it." Wade nodded. "That's all I ask." The fire popped. A coyote called in the distance. Willa stood, brushed her hands on her skirt, and turned toward the tent. Halfway there, she paused. "Good night, Wade." He looked up at her. "Good night, Willa." She ducked inside, and the flap fell closed behind her. Wade stayed by the fire, watching the coals die down, the quiet settling in around him like a blanket he didn't mind carrying. A choice had begun to take shape between them, unspoken, but steady. Something was changing, and for the first time in years, Wade didn't feel like running from it. The first frost came 3 nights later. Wade woke to a silver sheen across the grass and a stiffness in his joints he hadn't felt in years. He worked slower that morning, kindling the fire with care, pausing now and then to stretch the ache from his shoulders. Willa stepped out of the tent wrapped in a quilt, her hair pinned up haphazardly, eyes still soft with sleep. "I can help with breakfast," she said, voice hushed to not wake Addie. "You shouldn't be doing it all." Wade handed her a pan and nodded toward the flour sack. "You know how to make biscuits without a stove?" She smiled, small and sideways. "On a flat rock if I have to." He watched her knead the dough, her movements practiced but not hurried. She didn't fill space with talk, and he appreciated that. When Addie finally emerged, still rubbing her eyes, Wade handed her a warmed biscuit with honey and watched her face light up. Later, after the sun had burned off the frost, Wade brought out a spare bridle and laid it across a log. "I thought I might teach Addie how to handle a horse," he said quietly to Willa. "Just the basics, if that's all right." Willa tilted her head, studying him. "She's never been that close to one. She's not fearless. She doesn't have to be." Willa nodded once. "I'll stay close." Wade led his gelding out, steady and calm, while Addie stood a few feet away, arms tucked behind her back. He crouched, spoke to her low and even, showing her how to hold her palm flat for the horse to sniff. It took time, but eventually, she stepped forward and let the animal nuzzle her fingers. "You've got a quiet way with her," Willa said later, as they watched Addie gather little pieces of grass to feed the horse. "Not many men would bother. I don't see much use in rushing children." He looked at her. "Or anyone who's learned to be cautious." She didn't answer, but her eyes lingered on his face longer than they had before. That evening, the wind came from the north, sharp and insistent. Wade reinforced the tent flap and added another blanket to their pile. Willa was inside with Addie, humming something faint and tuneless, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. When she emerged, she sat beside him without a word, pulling her shawl tighter. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said after a while. He didn't speak, just waited. "I don't want to be a burden, and I don't want Addie to grow up thinking we're always waiting for something better that never comes." "You wouldn't be a burden," Wade said. "And you don't have to wait anymore." She turned to look at him. "I've never been around a man who didn't want something in return." He didn't flinch. "I want peace, and company that doesn't come with lies." Her voice dropped. "I don't have anything left to prove. I'm not the same woman I was when I came west. I'm not the same man I was before the river took my sister." She drew a long breath, then let it out slow. "Do you think it's possible to start again without pretending everything before didn't happen?" "I think starting again is all anyone ever does. The trick is doing it with someone who understands where you've been." They sat close, firelight casting long shadows behind them. She didn't say anything else, but she didn't go back inside either. The next morning, Wade hitched the wagon he rarely used, pulling it from the thicket where it had sat for months. He worked in silence, oiling the wheels and checking the axles. Willa came up beside him, holding a folded shirt, sleeves neatly stitched. "You planning to take us into the valley?" she asked. "If you're willing." She nodded, handing him the shirt. "You'll need this. Yours has more holes than thread." He took it, fingers brushing hers. "Thank you." That afternoon, he taught Willa how to steer the wagon with the reins looped proper, while Addie sat between them, legs swinging off the edge. The trail ahead ran flat for a while, bordered by golden grass and pockets of aspen turning amber. Willa's hands were steady on the reins, her back straight. "I forgot how it feels to drive forward with purpose," she said. Wade smiled, the kind that didn't need showing. "You're doing just fine." They camped that night under open sky, the stars clear and sharp. Addie fell asleep early, curled beneath the quilt. Willa stayed by the fire with Wade, their shoulders nearly touching, no words between them. He passed her the coffee pot, still warm. She took it, sipped, then passed it back. "I want to keep going," she said. "Not just to the valley. I mean with you. With this." He turned to her. "That what you want?" She nodded. "I want something real. Even if it's quiet. Even if it's hard." "It'll be both," Wade said. "But it'll be ours." Her hand found his, fingers rough from work, warm from the flame. She didn't look away. That night, they lay on opposite sides of the fire, but the space between them no longer held distance. It held promise, steady and waiting. And in the hush before sleep, Willa whispered toward the dark, "You were right. I shouldn't have been alone that night." Wade answered without opening his eyes, "Neither should I." The wagon reached the foothills of the Wind River Valley 3 days later, after a slow, steady climb through dry grasslands and granite ridges. The land here opened wide beneath the sky, rimmed by low pine forests and the distant shimmer of snow on the high peaks. They made camp near a stand of fir trees where the creek ran shallow and cold over polished stones. Wade unhitched the horse and led it to water while Willa gathered flat stones for the fire ring. Addie crouched nearby, digging with a stick and arranging pine cones in rows like she was inventorying a tiny world. The silence between them all was easy now, not heavy with wondering, but filled with the unspoken rhythm of people who had come to trust one another without ceremony. That evening, after the fire was built and supper cleaned away, Willa sat cross-legged beside Wade with a folded piece of calico in her lap. She was stitching something with care, her brow drawn in focus. "What are you making?" Wade asked, his voice low under the hush of wind through the trees. She didn't look up. A pocket for Addie's shawl. She hides little things in the seams, bits of string, feathers, pebbles. I figure she might as well have a place meant for it. He leaned back against a log, one knee raised, watching the firelight catch in her hair where it had slipped from its braid. You always make things with your hands? Since I was a girl, my mother taught me, said even the smallest work done with care could be a blessing. She paused, tugging the thread taut. It gave her something to hold on to when things slipped away. Wade shifted, resting his forearms on his knees. You think that's why you kept sewing after he left? She tied off the thread and looked at him. I think I needed to remember I could still make something lasting, even if it was just cloth. Wade nodded, quiet a moment. Not everything that leaves has to take the good with it. She met his eyes then, her expression unreadable but soft. In the morning, they found a small homestead nestled in a hollow 2 miles west, a weather-beaten cabin, empty but sound, with a collapsed lean-to and a rusted stove half buried in dry leaves. Wade pushed open the door while Willa kept Addie back, and the hinges groaned like they hadn't moved in years. There's no sign anyone's been here in a long while, Wade said, stepping into the dust-heavy air. Roofs intact. Floors stable. Willa crossed the threshold slowly, scanning the walls. This could be a beginning. Wade glanced toward the low mountains beyond the trees. There's water close, enough grass for a small garden come spring. If we clear the brush, patch the roof, fix the stove. I can do the stove, she said, and Addie can help stack wood. Wade smiled, one corner of his mouth lifting. Then I'll start on the lean-to. They worked steadily over the next week. Wade felled a pair of dead pines and stripped them down with short, even strokes of the hatchet. Willa swept out the cabin, scrubbed the walls with boiled water and lye, and mended a curtain she found balled in the corner. Addie collected kindling and sorted nails into a tin box she carried around like it was treasure. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and lit the trees gold, Wade climbed down from the roof where he'd been replacing shingles. Willa stood in the garden plot, sleeves rolled and hands on her hips, surveying the ground she'd cleared. He walked over, brushing sawdust from his shoulders. You thinking of planting? Carrots, beans if the soil's deep enough. Might try onions if we can get seed in time. Wade looked at the earth, then back at her. That a promise? She turned toward him and didn't look away. It's a start. He reached for her hand, slow and sure, and she let him take it. Her fingers were rough from work, but warm, strong. He lifted them slightly between them, not quite kissing her knuckles, but close. I've been thinking about what comes next, he said. So have I. I want you here, not just for the season. Her throat moved as she swallowed. I've never had a man say that and mean it without wanting to own me. I don't want to own a thing, Wade said. I want to share it. All of it. The work, the quiet, the mornings. You. She looked down at their joined hands, running her thumb along the edge of his. I didn't come here looking for this. Neither did I. You really think it can last? I think we've both seen what doesn't. And we're still here. Willa nodded, slow and certain. Then we'll build it. Together. That night, after Addie had fallen asleep beneath the patched quilt, Willa stepped out into the clearing. Wade was sitting on the porch rail, sharpening his knife by lantern light. She walked to him without hesitation, slipped into the space beside him, and leaned her head against his shoulder. The knife stilled. He set it aside and rested his arm around her waist. They sat that way under the stars, no words needed, the quiet between them no longer empty. The fire in the hearth inside flickered against the cabin walls, and the wind carried the smell of pine and wood smoke, clean and sure. In the hush of the Wyoming dark, with the land wide open before them and nothing chasing from behind, Willa whispered, "You were right that night. I shouldn't have been alone." Wade turned, pressing a kiss to her temple, quiet and steady. "You aren't," he said. "Not anymore." The first snow came earlier than expected, drifting down one quiet morning while Wade was splitting kindling near the lean-to. It settled gently at first, clinging to the fence posts and the edges of the low roof. Willa stood at the cabin window, watching it with a stillness that felt almost reverent. "I never saw snow this deep back home," she said, her voice low as she stepped outside, wrapping a wool shawl tight around her shoulders. "It's quieter than I thought it'd be." Wade rested the axe against the stump. "It muffles everything, makes the world feel smaller." She stepped down from the porch, brushing snow from a barrel's rim. "Addie asked me last night if the snow would reach the stars." He smiled faintly. "She always thinking that big?" "She is now." They spent the day tending to what must be done, hauling water before the creek froze over, stacking dry wood near the door, lining the cabin with burlap sacks along the floorboards to keep the cold from creeping in. Addie stayed bundled inside, tracing letters in a slate board Wade had found in town, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. That evening, Willa sat on the floor with a small pair of scissors, trimming pieces from a bundle of worn cloth. Wade crouched beside her, watching in silence as she lined the scraps into a pattern. "You planning something new?" he asked. She nodded, not looking up. "A quilt for Addie, something she'll grow into. I've been piecing it in my head since we left Clearwater." Wade leaned back on one hand, his other brushing the scraps. "You're always making things for her. She deserves something that's hers, not just what's left over." He looked at her for a long moment. "You ever think of making something for yourself?" "I think I have been," she said softly, lifting her gaze to his. Later, after Addie had been tucked in and the fire burned low, Willa stepped out onto the porch with Wade, a wool blanket draped around her shoulders. The snow had stopped, leaving a fresh white hush across the trees. The stars were sharp overhead, and the moon threw long shadows across the yard. "I never asked you," she said, breaking the stillness, "what you meant to do after the valley, before all this." "I didn't have a plan," Wade said. "I'd been moving so long I forgot what standing still felt like. Do you remember now?" He looked at her, the firelight behind them casting a faint, warm glow around her hair. "I remember better than I thought I would." She stepped closer, their breath mingling in the cold. "I don't know if I'm still the same woman I was before Joel left," she said. "You're not," Wade said plainly. "You're stronger. You know what you'll carry and what you won't." She didn't look away from him. "And you? You still carry her." "I always will," he said. "But I'm not lost in it anymore." She reached for his hand, sliding her fingers between his. "Then let's stay here. For good." His grip tightened around hers. "I want that." They didn't need to say more. The wind moved gently through the trees, and the world felt whole in that moment, like it had reshaped itself around them. By early spring, the garden plot was turned and ready, the soil dark and damp beneath Wade's hands as he worked beside Willa. Addie followed behind them, poking holes with a stick, dropping in beans with careful fingers. The cabin had taken on the look of a home, curtains hung, shelves built, a new table Wade had carved from pine standing beneath the window. One morning, Willa came in from the creek with wet skirts and a flush in her cheeks. Wade looked up from the stove where he was stirring cornmeal. "There's a doe with a fawn down by the bend," she said. "Addie saw them first. She's got an eye for the quiet things," he said. Willa smiled, brushing snowmelt from her sleeves. "Like someone else I know." Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the hills in rose-colored gold, Wade placed something small and wrapped in cloth into Willa's hands. She opened it slowly, revealing a band of silver, shaped by hand rough, but solid, the metal warm from his pocket. "I've nothing fancy to offer," he said, voice low. "But I want this life with you. All of it." Her fingers curled around the ring. "You already gave me the best part. A place where I can be who I am and not apologize for it." Wade reached out, brushing her cheek with the back of his hand. "Then you'll marry me?" She nodded, eyes full and clear. "Yes, I will." They married under the cottonwoods come May, with the creek running high behind them and Addie placing wildflowers in her mother's braid. A traveling preacher from Riverton said the words beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. There was no crowd, no music, just a quiet vow spoken with hands clasped and hearts steady. That night, Willa stood at the cabin door, watching Wade and Addie build a cairn near the edge of the yard, flat stones stacked carefully, one atop the next, marking the place they had made their own. She stepped down to join them, pressing her hands into Wade's as he placed the last stone. "What's it for?" Addie asked. "For remembering," Wade said, "and beginning." They stood together as the wind rustled the grass around them, the land wide and open, their shadows long in the fading light. Inside, the fire waited, warm and steady, and in each of them, a quiet certainty had taken hold. They had come through loss and silence and loneliness not untouched, but unbroken. And now they had each other not by chance, but by choice. And they never had to be alone again.